We are live. Yes. Awesome. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another Manga Masterclass live stream from TOKYOPOP. And
Hello.
through Natalia Batista, incredible artist and writer behind Sword Princess Amalthea, who just wrapped an incredibly successful Kickstarter, didn't you?
Yay! Yes, we've been working on a Kickstarter we've been working on a game, and we've been kickstarting it, and this is the reason why we're late with this lesson today, because I finished the Kickstarter 15 minutes ago, and it was a success. So I'm so happy. There's going to be a really cool game, fully voiced with an anime intro. I couldn't be more happy. So it's going to be really fun to work with this game the coming year, and it's going to be a continuation of the manga. So if you haven't read the manga, I recommend you to go to either a bookstore online or physical bookstore and buy it. Sword Princess Amalthea, out by TOKYOPOP, but it's also available. Yeah, there it is. This is the story, yay! And it's also available in the Pop Comics app by TOKYOPOP. So if you prefer reading digitally, you can read it digitally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can't recommend it highly enough, guys. It's great manga. It's a great story. I won't say anything, but I didn't see the twist at the end coming. That caught me by surprise when I first read it. So definitely give it a try, guys. It's absolutely worth it.
Yeah, as we're part of this lesson, this Manga Masterclass that we've been doing on this channel, we've been talking about how to make stories and how to do character designs and everything. But one thing that I can't stress enough is how important it is to make a good ending, and how important it is to make an ending that doesn't feel expected. And my best recommendation and tip for you, if you're like, how do I do that? My recommendation is actually to do a survey about among your friends and your family. So you give them the whole story, maybe in text or in pictures, whatever you prefer, without the ending, and then you ask them, what do you think will happen in the end? And then you make a survey, and you put down all the alternatives that they give you, the choices they give you, in a text, in a list. And this is the do not do list. You're not allowed to use any of these endings, because these are the endings that people expected. So now you have to do something else. So if you manage to come up with an ending that is not on this list, is not an expected ending, then you're doing a good thing. Yeah. So that's my best recommendation. Do a survey.
That's awesome. That's a really good tip. Yeah. I love that. So this class today is our 6th lesson in the Manga Masterclass series that we're doing. If you haven't caught up with the other episodes, you can find them at tokyopop.com/manga masterclass, or take a look on our YouTube channel for the playlist. And we've got on the website, on the tokyopop.com/manga masterclass, we also have a couple of little behind the scenes sketches and scripts and stuff that Natalia's made as we're going along. And we are currently following along this very cool witches sort of storyline that you've created. This very cool, creepy story that we're working with. And so today we're going to be looking at panel layout and narration, I guess, continuing this theme. So Natalia, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Yeah, so the story about the witches, that was in the last episode about how to do storyboards, and in the episode before that when we talked about how to do scripts. But in this episode, I'm going to focus on final pages from Amalthea, because I want to talk about how to do the narration of a story, how important it is to know how to visually guide the reader through a page and through a panel. So it's easier when it's finished pages. I'm going to show you, and I'm going to talk a little bit about do's and don'ts. That's pretty much what this episode is going to be about. So we're going to keep the history about the witches that we made last 2 weeks ago. We're going to keep it for the coming episodes, but at this time, let's check out some Sword Princess Amalthea pages to talk about narration. That's what we're going to talk about today. And I just want to introduce this lesson also with the idea of the difference between reading and making comics. It's very different. Like if you artists who sit and watch this, or writers for that matter, creators, if you sit and watch this and you're like, oh wow, it's really fun reading manga, I want to make manga. When you step into the body of a manga creator, you will notice how if you start analyzing works, analyzing the mangas you read, you will notice how your perception change, and how you kind of destroy the enjoyment of reading manga in the beginning. Because like I have read so many mangas where I noticed after flipping through 10 pages that I didn't read the manga. I was just looking at page layouts, I was checking character designs, I was checking backgrounds, like I was dissecting the comic and I was not reading it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one thing I would like to tell you, is that there is a difference in between reading and like enjoying comics as a reader, or doing it or reading them to analyze.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the step I think you should. It is a bit scary, but it's so worth it when you're gonna create comics. Like I got back to enjoying manga. Like I can turn off my analytic eye, but in the beginning it's really hard because you turn it on and then it's all you do is analyze. But that's a good thing. In the beginning you really need to analyze the works you're reading, because that's the way you learn.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. Remember the difference between reading to enjoy and reading to break apart and analyze each step of the comic, each part of the comic. So yeah, that's learning how to turn on and turn off the analytic eye. I call it the analytic eye when you read the analytic reading of manga. And that's also for you, like an editor. You also
Mm-hmm.
know how to analyze, is this a good work? How could it become better? How
Yep.
can you tweak this? Especially when you're working with an artist. I think that's very important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been reading manga since I don't even know, 14, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I love manga, but it wasn't until I started working at Tokyopop that I started really paying attention to panel layouts and spreads and the storytelling behind the art. And you really do. You're absolutely correct. There are manga that I love, and I'd never noticed it before, but now I look at it and go, huh,
Mm-hmm.
this artist doesn't like backgrounds because
Yeah.
everything happens in a white void. There's a
Yes.
door if they need to knock on a
Um,
door, but you start to pick up on those little things. And it's not necessarily to say that made the
mm,
manga bad or that it ruined it for me, but it was a little detail that I hadn't noticed when I wasn't looking at it, like you said, with that
mhm.
analytical eye.
Yeah, like I know that I remember the time when I think it was me and my friends, we were reading Fushigi Yugi,
Mm-hmm.
which is a shoujo manga from back in the day. I think it's more than 30, 40 years old or something. But this manga, when we actually, I think it was like 15, 16-year-old, and suddenly we got to know that manga artists used assistants. And we're like flipping through the manga and we find a page with a lot of background characters, and we're like, this had to be done by an assistant, because they were so ugly. Like it didn't look like humans, it didn't look like her style.
Yeah.
And we're like, what? So that's when we realized, okay, this had to be done by a really poor assistant that didn't get enough money or work or time to do this work.
Yeah.
And that the way of kind of realizing that manga is not made by a computer that you just press a button, but it's
Mm-hmm.
actually made by humans, and it has a process. And that's what you need to learn when you start analyzing manga, to learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we're going to look at some finished pages from my own manga, Sword Prince and Maltea, to dissect them and talk about narration in them. Yeah, let's
That's really
start.
important. And I just want to jump in real quick because I actually sat down yesterday and I watched a 2.5 hour YouTube video about a series. And I'm not going to name it because I know it's quite popular and I don't want to ruin anyone's fun, but about why this series had potential that it never lived up to. And
Mm.
a lot of it boiled down to it was heavily influenced by a lot of anime.
Mm.
The creators were very outspoken about that and very open about that, but they didn't fully understand what made these scenes so cool. So they were
Mm.
copying, but not copying. There was no plagiarism, but they were taking inspiration from things without understanding why they initially worked. So they didn't really
Mm.
work in their series. So that's why it's super important to. I think this is going to be really cool for Natalia to break down the scene and really show you why things are the way they are so you can fully understand it. So there's nothing wrong with looking at a scene from, I don't know, My Hero Academia and going, this is so unbelievably cool and I love the feelings it brings up in me and I want to do something that has that same effect on other people. Break it down technically and try to figure out exactly what the creator did to make it so cool and that evokes that reaction from people. And then you're not just flat out copying something, you're using it to invoke those same feelings in your own work.
Yeah, and I think I said this last time when we talked about storyboards,
Mm-hmm.
how when you're doing your comics, actually the visual part of the storytelling, when you're putting it into pictures, the way you compose that's what we're going to talk about today. How to like the composition of a picture, the layout of a panel, the narration in panels and in frames, how what you choose to show and in what way. That is like, you can copy a style. You can copy Naruto or Dragon Ball or Sailor Moon to the point where you become a copycat style wise. But something that is really, really almost impossible to copy is how someone narrate a story visually. Like that is so much connected to how we read and how we think personally, and we
Mm-hmm.
think in so many different ways. Like, for example, did you know that there's people who I don't think I mentioned this, but did you know that there's people who has aphantasia?
Mm-hmm.
It means that you can't see pictures in your head.
Yeah.
So it's actually when you for example read a book, you can't visualize what you're reading. It's like it says it happens in a forest and the trees are blowing in the wind, but they don't see trees, and they just recognizing the words and like registering the words, but it's not going to form a picture. And this means they will think in a different way, and they will probably make a comic in a different way. I still think they can make comics,
Oh, yeah.
but it's going to be a totally different kind of comic than I would make, because I'm very visual and I see pictures very much in my head, and have very vivid night like dreams and nightmares. Like they can be very strong for me because I have so much imagery in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's also one thing, that you can copy a style, but you cannot copy a narration style, how you narrate a story visually. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're going to talk about today. Is about how to find your narration voice, how to narrate your story visually. And that's both for you who are comic writers and comic artists, because both ways you have to kind of know in what order to show something, how much to show in a picture, how to compose a picture, how to not put too much and too little information in one frame and stuff like that. So first of all, the first thing we have to talk about is, of course, how to read a frame. So I'm going to talk about how to read a frame, and then how to compose, the composition of a frame, of a panel in a manga. So first of all, the first here is going to be a spread from Amalthea. So this is from the first book in Amalthea. And we're going to talk about reading direction. The first thing is you have to know what reading direction do you have. Like, in what steps do you read the page? So, for example, this one starts. It's a Western manga, so I prefer to start up here. This is where I start the manga. Let's do this on a new layer. So this is where I start the manga, up here. So this is like the starting corner. And in a Japanese manga, you would start over here. But I prefer doing it when I know it's going to be published in the West. I prefer doing it in the Western reading direction, because I know there is actually a lot of people who don't read manga, and this could be a starting point for them because it is in a Western reading direction. I know that also scares some readers, because some readers think it's wrong. They prefer to have it in a Japanese reading direction because they're so used to it. But I think it's a choice, and
Yes.
I definitely think you should consider doing it in a Western reading direction if you're publishing it in the West. So this is how you read a comic in the West. You read from top to down, and this feels very basic for some of you, I think, but we have to go through the basics to go into the details later. So you read this, and then you start on the next page and you read down to the bottom of the next page. That's the reading direction. And to know this, it's important because that's how you should guide the eye. So the next step, when you've decided what the reading direction you have, and you know that you're going to start in the top corner, in the top right corner, left corner in this situation, and go down to the bottom right corner, then you know that the next step is going to be how to guide the reader through the page. And this is when you start. Yeah.
I'm just going to interrupt you very quickly, Natalia. We can actually only see we can only see your color picker on the screen. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Excellent. All right.
But you can see when I draw lines, right?
No, we can literally only see the color picker. That's all we can see.
Oh no, why?
Yeah.
That's really weird. Huh.
We may need to readjust the window a little bit.
Yeah, let's I stop share it and then I share it again.
Okay.
I think it was because I opened up the color picker and it stopped sharing the right screen.
I see.
This is good.
There we go. Let's make sure that we can see it all properly. Yes, perfect. All right, now we've got it fixed. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt there.
No. I'm not gonna, because I'm not gonna use the color picker again, so it's not gonna happen again.
Perfect.
So now I'm gonna keep the red. I think it's better to see because I want to show how you guide the visual reading. So the next one is talking about how to put information in a frame, in a page, and how to guide the reader through a page. And that's when you talk about the S shape. You try to guide the reader in a shape where you can go from one frame to another. So when we start up here, this is the first bubble that someone's going to read. They're going to read this frame, and we're going to talk about how to read each frame later on. But you'll read down here to the next bubble. You probably cross over to these ones. You're going to look at the faces. So it's usually things that people look for. It's usually faces, words, and hands, because that's things that do things, like body movements or hands, because that's when you actually have a lot of actions. So I'm gonna go from the text over to the faces, and then probably down here, because you see how the frames go together, and you feel like, okay, this foot is the next one, and then we go up here to the bubble, the face. Maybe you check the whole like you notice the hand. It's removing the branch here, and then you go down to this one, and then you feel like, since this one is above this one, this bubble is the first bubble is above the second one, you can actually go like this, and you see how you stop on the face as well. So this is how you guide the reader through a page, and it's actually very learning to do this with your pages. As you've done the storyboards we did last time, you actually draw this line on the page in red and just double check, have I misplaced something? Maybe I've placed a face on the wrong spot and I haven't put it in the line of the guidance for the reader. So make sure that things actually, as you can see, I actually prefer putting, if I do, like here I have 1 and 2 bubbles in the picture. I make sure that these bubbles are on opposite sides on the face, because that way I know the reader will guide through the face and read the face in between. So this is a good way to guide the reader through a panel, but also a full page. And we can do the same on the other side. This is the first one. We read down the face. We go over here, read this text. We also look at the pictures, but we mostly follow the text. And then we go down here, the foot, and we're over to the next page. So you can see how this is actually similar. It's a similar shape on both. It's kind of like a almost like an S shape or like a double S or something. Like there's a guided line through the panel and the page. And this is what you need to learn to both see when you read manga, take up manga, make a copy of the one page. Don't draw in your manga books. It's very important. But you can take a copy of your page, of the manga page in a manga book, and just try to do a red line between all the important things and see how you're guided through a page. Yeah?
I'm gonna resize this a little bit, Natalia, because it turns out that the window was cutting some things off here. So hopefully this will be a little bit easier for people to see.
By the way, this is not alcohol. This is
I know, I was going to say, at first, when I first saw you, I was like, Natalia, is that a cool little wine bottle you've got there? But
no, but I prefer glass, no plastics.
It's cute. That's very cute.
And it's good because because it has a lid, so when it falls, I don't have water everywhere.
There we go. Perfect. So now we can see your whole picture there. And I was going to jump in real quick to also say that I've read comics, manga, things where the panels or the word bubbles and the placement of everything was bad. And I actually struggled to figure out what I was supposed to read next or who was talking or whatever. And this is a big thing to recognize. If you do it right, nobody will notice. But if you do it wrong, everyone will notice.
Yes.
If you're doing
this is the rule.
If you're doing it right, then people's eyes will flow across the page exactly as they're supposed to, and it'll be a beautiful reading experience. If it's wrong, they're going to start struggling, and it's going to jerk them out of the narrative.
Yeah, and I had a teacher here in Sweden when I was studying comics at a comic art school that said a very good thing, because he was talking about the magic of comics. And it's the same thing when you watch a movie. If the movie is really good, you get immersed in the story and you stay in that world and in that kind of feeling and emotion of the world and the story. And every time when they, for example, break the fourth wall, that's another thing that we talk about in movies and in comics. When you become meta, when it becomes like it throws off the whole story, it doesn't feel genuine, it doesn't feel organic, and it feels forced, or it feels unnatural for the story and the characters. That's when the magic is broken, and you never want to break the magic. And another way to break the magic is to remind the reader that they're reading a comic. And just like you said, you get reminded that you're reading a comic if it's hard to read it. If it's natural and it flows, you don't notice that you're reading a comic. You're just in the story, you're in the space, you're there. And that's what you want to give the reader. You don't want to have to guide them. Never use arrows, never use 1 2 3 in the that's for like very simple Donald Duck comics. Like that's we're beyond that. Remember, I'm not saying Donald Duck is bad, but I've seen it in Donald Duck comics and I don't approve.
And you'll see,
I think
you'll see in manga, a lot of North American manga publishers will sometimes have a little arrow at the top of the page that says, like, read in this direction. That's fine. That's for your editors to put in if they need to, but that's only because if you're reading a right to left manga as opposed to, say, Natalia, who does hers left to right, there are going to be people who have never read manga before and don't understand. But we'll have, like, if you're reading manga, I'm sure I can pull one out right here. Let's grab one and an example. We have in the back a little guide on, what panel to read next and what order to read them in. That's for your publisher to put in. Obviously, if you're self-publishing, that's something to think about, but don't put it in the panels.
No, and don't number the panels. That's just lazy. You should be able to guide the reader without numbering or without having arrows between the panels. If you have to have an arrow, you've done it wrong.
Yeah.
That's a clue that you've done something wrong.
And the only time we will see numbers in panels as as a publisher is if at the thumbnail stage, if your thumbnails are very rough and you number your panels and then you've got an attached document that says, by the way, here's what's happening in each of these. That's fine. But again, they're not meant to stay there, and they're not for the reader, they're for your editor.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another thing, because that's about a work process, a work document. It's not for the final print. Don't put it in the printed file, print file. So when we read a frame or a panel, it's the same thing. You have to guide the reader. So here we have a panel from Amalthea where you have for the first thing, you have the bubble up here. You start over here. So this is where you start reading, because as I said, this is a Western comic, Western manga. So you start up here, you either go to the face or you go downwards, but either way, it doesn't matter, because it's kind of happening at the same time. So you can either go this way, or this way. It's okay either way. And then you go, of course, you maybe look at the hands and like the posture, And then you go, and as you can see, like I said before, I placed two speech bubbles over here and one speech bubble over here and her in between. And that way I guide the reader, and they have to pass through the character and kind of feel the emotion of the character, and they have to look at the face of the character and the body language to be able to read the rest. So even a reader that is maybe not used to reading comics, there are readers that are very used to reading books, and they prefer only reading the text in the comics, and they have a hard time to kind of decipher the pictures. And for those people, it can sometimes be hard when you have the text always on the top or always on the bottom of a frame, because that way they will never read the frame. They will never go through the picture and actually take in the picture. So to be able to guide the reader and show them you have to read the picture as well to be able to understand it, that is your job as the artist and the writer to be able to do that, to storytell them through the picture as well. So as you can see, this is, if I'm gonna go make a more cleaner version, I would probably read this this way, face, this one, hand over here. So as you can see, this is the line that I will make. This is the S, or the shape that becomes of the reading direction. This is how I think the eye will be guided. Of course, we all read mangas different ways, but I think this is a very natural way to decipher this picture. And this is also one thing you should remember. Some maybe even go down here and check this character's face, or maybe this character's face, and then up here. But it doesn't matter, because they still have read the text, and they're still going to go from one bubble to the next and read all of it. So how you guide the reader is important, and to compose the picture, and that's what we're gonna talk about in the next step.
That's a really interesting point as well, because if your story is very gripping and people want to, I've had manga where I've been really invested in the story and I want to know what happens next, and it's very tempting to just kind of read the speech bubbles and then skip to the next one because you want to know what's going to happen. But if you guide people to the art, you're making sure that they're taking that in at the same time, that they are also looking at the art, not just reading like it's a novel.
Yeah. And then we come to the next step, which is what should be read first? Is because that also matters for each frame or each line that the character says. Do you need to show the facial reaction, the reaction of the character, the face, the facial expression before or after they're reading the bubble? Because they can't read the text, the line, and also read the face at the same time. It's impossible to read both. So even if you put them right next to each other, like for example, if any of you have read Death Note, there's a lot of text in people's faces in Death Note.
Yeah.
And I know it's kind of an effect of people talking or thinking a lot, but it also kind of makes it very confusing, because you don't know if you're going to read the text or the face first. So as an artist, you have to decide, should I show the face or the reaction or the words first? And that's what I'm showing on this page. So for example, in the first frame up here, we read the text first. This is number 1. And then we read the face number 2, or number 2 or number 3 over here. So this is number 3. So this is the order. The text is first, and then the reactions. And also the action. This is also the action over here. So we have first, number 1 is text, and number 2 is actions or reactions. But in, for example, the next one over here, of course, we read this bubble, and it's kind of part of both top frame and bottom frame, or a middle frame. And we read this text first, but then this action and this face comes before this box here. So this is number 1, and this is number 2. We have the reaction or action first, and then we have the words second. So in this way, it depends on how you read the manga, because I wanted the reader to feel like if this was a movie, they would hear, so move that butt, and then see her move him. And then she would say, I'm tired of this stupid quest, time to end it and go home. And then, baff, he's like pushing her hand away, and you see his angry face, and then he says, no. So it's kind of like, if you saw it opposite way, he said no, and then baff. That would be more of an emotional reaction. But this way, it was more of a controlled reaction. Like he was like, baff, and then no. You can feel like the difference. There's a difference in that. In did we see the reaction or did we see the words first?
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing on the bottom frame. So in the bottom frame, you read the face. This is number 1, and then the bubble, number 2. So this is because I wanted the reader to feel like she turns her head and stares at him and says, "What?" You see how the difference could be. Like instead of her saying "What?" and then turning her head, that feels much more short and quick. But by having you see her face first and then see the bubble, it kind of elongates the feeling. It kind of feels like she's turning her head slowly, looking at him, staring at him, and then saying, "What?" It's kind of like making the scene more effectful. So I think you should think about if the reaction or the words comes first. That's very important, especially for you who are maybe writers working with an artist. This could be important to differentiate. Do you want it to be like reaction or action before words, or vice versa? Because sometimes in a manuscript you just write the character sits down and says hello, but should the movement of sitting down be first, or should the hello be first? That can actually matter a lot for some frames. So remember the action, reaction, or the words, which is first. That's another thing to remember. Do you want to add something?
No, I think it sounds
No?
fantastic. I think it's again, it's another one of those things that is more important than you may realize as a reader. There are a lot of subtle things that you'll see in a manga that you don't realize are being done intentionally. It just works, and because it works, you don't think about it. But yeah, absolutely. Whether you see action first or text first is definitely going to color the energy of a scene and your impression of the character and their impulsiveness. It's a really good point.
And I see a lot of aspiring but amateurish artists who forget about this, and you start reading the comic and it feels so weird sometimes when a face comes before text, or vice versa, or the bubble is in the wrong corner, or in it feels like the rhythm is off. So really remember that. Don't do this unconsciously, do this very consciously. Like have a conscious make everything as a conscious decision, where you put the frame, the bubble, the speech bubble, the words, where you put it, like where you put a sound effect, for example. That's also very important. So that's what I'm going to talk about now, like about on a page you can also use animated effects. As you can see up here, you can see we have 2 frames up here on this page. I used the whole frame to show, because there's several things I want to show here. But up here we have an animated effect. So first we're going to read this big picture here, and then we go up here. And in the big picture, you see Amalthea bending over and kissing Ocean to waking up, because that's how a princess wakes up a prince, of course.
Of course, we all know that. We've all read fairy tales.
Yes, yeah. It's how it happens. And then we notice that he's waking up. So the first frame is just slowly his eyes opening, and the next one, the same. Actually, I took the frame and just copied it. So this is actually a thing you can easily make if you work digitally, or if you just use a digital editing tool after you've drawn the whole comic and scanned it. And what I changed was his face, and this is it's maybe often used as comical effect, but it can also be used as a very serious effect as well. It doesn't have to be comedy, but just the fact that you're using an animated effect in between these to show it's almost like, these pictures where you have the same picture but you double it, and in one of them you miss some things are missing, and you're like, what is missing? Like, find the 5 things that are missing. This kind of thing is, we as humans are taught to find differences between things that look the same. So this is very effectful for us, because we see one frame and then we see the next. It's very similar, but there's a big difference. So we notice the difference, and that makes it animated in our head. So this is also a thing you can use.
Yeah, I was going to say it emphasizes that difference as well, because I see this used a lot in manga and in comics when you do want to highlight maybe I don't know, someone says something and a character is so shocked by it, you'll see the same frame 3 times, and then the last one, their mouth is open and they're going, what? Because it shows how long it took for them to process what that person was saying. So yeah, it's great for emphasis. Of course, it's great for you as an artist because you don't have to redraw it 1,000
Mm-hmm.
times over. But yeah, it's not. I mean, it's a very important tool when you use it right.
Yeah, and it can be very effectful. All these things needs to be used in moderation, because otherwise, just like we talked about last 2 weeks ago, last episode, last lesson, we talked about storyboards and how to make a spread, a manga spread, more manga-ish, but by making some frames bleed out into the side of the page. And go check out that video if you want to talk more or read more about, or learn to know more about storyboarding and about how to panel a page, because this episode is not about how to panel a page. That was the last episode. This one is about how to read and how to compose each panel, how to fill each panel with something, to know what to fill it with. And when we talked about that, we talked about how to bleed out images into the edge of the paper and beyond, and how important it is to make bleed. And that is also one thing, like you can't use bleed on every frame, because then the effect will disappear when you actually want it to be an effectful frame. And that's the same thing here. Don't overuse the animation effect. Use it when it's needed and when you think it will be very useful to show this difference. Like here, we can see how Ocean is first waking up and we're thinking, oh, he likes it. And then, no, he doesn't like it.
No, he does not.
So this, yeah, so it clearly shows the difference. Like it shows how he's like waking up and then realizing is what is happening. And then in the next one, he's shoving her away. So it's an animated effect, and
Which
that's also one thing.
I just also want to jump in and say how great that is, because we do see that in fairy tales all the time. The prince shows up and kisses the sleeping princess or whatever, and it's like, dude, what are you doing? I love that Ocean is like, no, get off me. What the heck?
Yeah, you perv.
Yeah.
Get off me. Yeah, that was my idea. He doesn't take this. No. So next step I want to talk about is shots. So now we're gonna talk about how to compose the frame, the content of the frame of the panels. What is gonna be inside of each panel. So I'm gonna open up a new one. So we're gonna talk about different kind of shots, and this is, I was talking to UK and to Janae at the TOKYOPOP as well, because Janae, another of the editors, have a film background, and I was talking to her about what is the proper word about what you show in a picture, and we realized that it might be shot. Like how much you show in one picture. We talked a little bit about that last lesson, where we talked about big and small frames, like elongated frames or like wide frames, how you can in a panel, like in panels in manga or in comics, you use panels. I'm using the word frame, but it's the same thing as panel. Like I mean, using them in interchangeably. Yeah. So in a panel, you can, depending on the size or how you shaped it, you can put in different amount of information. And of course, you don't just make it a size. You have to decide what I'm gonna put in it first before you decide what shape it's gonna have.
Sure.
So it's kind of like a something you have to think about at the same time, and that's what we talked about in the last episode, and the story, and the one about how to write manuscripts before that. But in this one, we're going to talk about how you actually, like, different kind of shots, what you can put in it. And of course, we have the first one is it's called Panoramic Shot. It's when you do a big frame, and this is very effectful when you change the scenery to a new place or a new scene in the story. It's good to enter the scene or to present the kind of the scenery, the place where the spectacle will happen, the kind of stage for the theater. You're gonna present that for the reader, so the reader knows where things gonna happen and what's gonna happen. So, for example, in this is a spread, double page spread in a manga. So in between here, we see the shadow. It's where the spine of the book is, and we can see in this bottom corner here, we see Amalthea on her horse, and this guide is entering the picture, and we look at this whole area here is the scene, and we also see how they are turned towards this tower over here, and this is where Ossian is. So this is where Amalthea is heading, and that's to guide the reader to the eye towards this. To be honest, I would actually, if I would recommend you to do this in the future, like if I would have redone this page, I would probably have moved this tower a little bit because it's a little bit too close to the spine. So I would maybe move it a little bit, like some centimeter, maybe half an inch towards the middle of the page. Maybe put it here instead. I don't know. It looks like it's in a spot where it could be like hard to find if you have it in a book. But that's a good thing to have. Like if you have a panoramic view, remember to know what you need to put in there and how you want to guide the reader through the panoramic view to see the important things. Like if you're gonna, in a story, you can foreshadow things. You can foreshadow, oh, they're gonna enter this building, and that's why you maybe should put the building in a very important spot in the picture. Yeah, you have some. Yeah, this is
Just gonna
So you
hold
see
this up so you can see the tower here.
Yeah, it's a little bit tight, huh?
It does. It's a little tight there, and the speech bubble's a little tight as well. So these are good to keep in mind when you're doing your double page spread. Is keep in mind if you're going to do a print book, what's going to be visible with the spine. I have read books. I have read manga that were you almost had to break the binding to even read it, and I'm like, I don't know which editor approved this. It was absolutely awful. It was unreadable. So keep that in mind when you're doing this. I think those are really good points there, Natalia.
Yeah, and this I made this spread I made in 2012. So I'm gonna blame my former self for this mistake.
Good. Honestly, I never liked former Natalia all that much. I like the new Natalia a lot. But that's the important thing, right? Keep this in mind, everyone. This is all a learning process. This is a journey. You are not. I'm gonna say this right now with full confidence. You're not gonna nail it with your first manga. Your first manga is gonna be full of problems, and that's okay.
And that's also the reason why I recommend people to not pick their most like passionate project as their first project. I see so many manga artists that are like, but I really want to make this manga. Yeah, but you suck. Like you need to first unsuck, and then you can actually make your manga. Like you need to first learn how to. Yeah, you need to first come to a point where you can actually make that story justice, because otherwise you're gonna make it an injustice. You're gonna make it an it's not gonna be favorable if you haven't learned how to narrate the story first.
And look at great manga creators like Akira Toriyama, who does Dragon Ball. His early stuff is awful. It's bad. Like his very, very, very early stuff. I love his work. It's almost unreadable. And he's started to come into his own at the very beginning of Dragon Ball, but as the series continues, you see him growing and growing and growing. Or a more very recent example, or probably more applicable example, is the creator One, who went famous for creating One Punch Man online as a jokey webcomic that, again, the art is dire, but it was obviously very funny and a great concept. So he got hired by Shonen Jump. They hired a new artist, and One Punch Man is fantastic. But because of the popularity of the story, when he pitched them Mob Psycho 100, they went, yeah, but this time we want you to do it. And the art's still rough, but you can see him starting to play around with panel layouts, and he's really thinking about it from a directorial perspective. And you start realizing that the kind of I say this fully not being able to draw more than a stick figure, but the crappiness of the art becomes endearing rather than a problem. So yeah, really think about these things, really, apply them. And if you do it well enough, you can have subpar art. If your technique is good enough and your storytelling is good enough, people won't mind.
Yeah. I mean, a good, compelling story. That's why we're talking about narration here. I think a lot of manga, how to draw manga videos on YouTube and out there, they're talking a lot about how to draw a manga eye, or how to draw a cute manga girl, or how to make a cool pose in manga style. But what we really need to talk about is how to story tell in manga, because making a character is not manga. Like, manga is comics. The word manga means comics in Japanese. So what you have to learn is how to narrate a comic. Like, you can do anime styled figures and make really pretty art. I'm not gonna complain. There's really great artists out there that just do illustrations. But if you want to do manga, you have to know how to story tell. And that's why just practice narration, practice storytelling, make as many short stories as possible, finish them, and then one day you're ready to make that big epic story that you have in mind. Don't use it as your first project. That's my recommendation. And there's also one more reason for that. I have seen really good comic artists that started out with their epic story, but they were 15, so the artwork wasn't really there yet, and they made it, and they kept going, and the second book and the third book, and they made like 800 1000 pages, and when they came up to like 5 6 700 pages, they were maybe 25, and the art was really good. The problem is, you can't publish book 5 and not publish book 1, and book 1 is ugly. Like, I'm sorry, it's ugly. Like, it's not up there. And I have talked to editors and publishers who've said, we really want to publish this manga, but the problem is the first book is not as good as the 5th book, and the artist doesn't want to redraw everything. That would be a hell of a lot of work. But in the end, they, as a publisher, they need to publish the whole series because they want the series, and the reader will open up the first book and say, nah, I'm not going to read this, and put it down.
Exactly.
So what did you do? You just gave your story a bad start, and that's not going to be a good thing. So start with short stories, learn how to storytell, learn how to draw, and then when you're ready, you're going to make a really good manga, and it's going to be top-notch from the beginning. Of course, you're going to evolve during that process as well, but it's going to be good. It's going to be from good to better, not from poor to good.
Absolutely. And I pulled this off of my shelf, but I want to show it as a great example of just a really good way to show a scene here, a character scene. The art isn't great, and you don't need to know how to read it to know that is threatening. That has a threatening aura right there. And I love that. It's how much you can get across. Exactly. One here knows what he's doing, and while his art is very simplistic and very basic, he gets across exactly the energy that he needs to. And that's so much more important than agonizing over whether your art is perfect. That said, I still completely agree with everything Natalia just said. Don't do that pet project as the first one. Hold on to that. That's your loving baby. Raise it, nurture it, learn, and then when you put it out, it'll be so much better.
Yes, I think that's the best recommendation. So this is Panoramic Shot. It's good for starting a scene, or for if you're in the middle of a scene and you want to, maybe people have moved around and you want to quickly you want to present to the reader where things are right now, because it's important for the next step of the story. It could be, for example, in an action scene where maybe they have moved around and fought each other, or they moved around a lot, and then it's good to have, for example, a scene where you present the whole scenery to know when one thrusts themselves towards the other one, you know where they are in connection to each other. So having some kind of panoramic shot is good for those instances, but don't overuse it, because it's hard. It takes a lot of time to do panoramic shots. Use them with moderation, but when you use them, put time and effort into them, because they're gonna be, to be honest, these are the money shots. I think these are the money shots in a manga. If you can do really good panoramic pictures, you're gonna prove to the reader that you know how to draw. Because everybody can learn how to draw manga eye. I'm sorry, it's not that complicated. I'm gonna be honest with you. You can practice how to do really good manga character designs, but if you can't do backgrounds, it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be really hard to make a comic. So this is a panoramic shot. Next one, we have a full body shot, and we had that one, I think it was here, we had a full, like this is a full body shot. This one here is a full body shot. You see the whole bodies, and that's good for when you want to show a movement, a positioning of the body. For example, in this instance, the reason why I used all of it, because also I wanted to camera to back up a bit, to feel a little bit distant. So we had a distance to them. They could have like a private moment, kind of. If we were too close, it would feel like, yeah, it would feel too intruding. So this way I could make it a little bit more serene and slow and harmonic by moving the camera back. So think about you as a camera person now. You're the camera person, you're holding the camera, and your characters are the actors. How close should you go to the actor and how far? And that's why not only reading manga and comics, but also watching movies can be good, because movies, you can learn a lot from how things is compositioned in the frame of a movie, in the view, in the shot, where things is.
And I think that's
So
a very natural way to think of it as a camera. Because I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of fiction podcasts, and they will often, when a narrator is describing a scene, they might say, and then the camera pans back and we see this great view. So even though there's no camera, it's a podcast, there's no visuals.
Yeah.
But everyone, I know what they mean when they say the camera pulls back. I feel like I'm moving with them, and the shot is widening, and so thinking of it that way is very natural.
Yeah, and also I also noticed that when I think about a story that I want to tell, many times I see it as an animation or a movie in my head, and I'm thinking, what snapshot do I need to take? Like I'm it's almost like I'm using a camera and taking like snapshots, and thinking, okay, maybe I'm positioning myself over here, taking a snapshot, and then up close over here. Like I kind of, and that's the fun thing I think about comics compared to movies, because in a comic you can put the camera in between the legs of a character that is driving a car. You cannot put a camera in there if you're making a movie. That would be dangerous. That would be really hard to modify the car so you can see under the brake in the car. Like you can't put a camera there. In comics you can. You can just draw the brake in front, and then like the whole like the whole body of the character. So like you can make really cool shots and dynamic shots, and we're going to talk about that as well. So the next one is half body, and this one is a typical half body. The difference between the half body and the full body is to think, is the legs important? Do we know the positioning of the legs? And in this case, I think the leg was important because I wanted to show how Amalthea put her knee on the bed to kind of lean forward. So that's why I moved out the camera, backed up with the camera to show the full body. In this frame is a full body, but in the smaller frame over here, I didn't need any of the legs or anything. I knew he was in like we know that he's in the bed, so it was enough to just show his upper body. So think about, is the legs important? I see a lot of amateur artists in the beginning, they draw full bodies all the time. They think we have to show the legs. No, you don't have to show the legs if it's not important. If the leg doesn't do a movement that is very important to show, then cut off the legs and make the frame smaller. So next one is, of course, a headshot. And I think we have that in another one over here. This one, for example. I would say this is I would consider this one a headshot because we don't see so much of his upper body. It's a little bit of a backed up headshot, but it's like the important parts of a headshot is the head and maybe the arms or the position of the hands towards the head. That's important. And then we have the extreme zoom in. The zoom in, this is a zoom in. So we have the headshot is maybe just like this, but then we have the zoom in is the head, and we can even have an extreme zoom in, and this is the extreme one when we move remove the mouth or remove the eyes, and we just see one part of the face. And this one, the extreme zoom in, is for, it's very effectful for if you want to show an emotion and you just want to show part of the emotion, to kind of make the reader guess the rest. It could be, for example, if you see a face but you only see the mouth, and you only see that the mouth is kind of sad, and that way you could kind of feel like, okay, the character is tearing up, something is happening, this is part of an emotion. It's kind of, it doesn't tell you everything, but it's giving you enough information so that you know that something is changing. And in this case, we see that the eyes are opening up, and like she's feeling something. The emotions are strong right here. So that's the extreme. And deciding which one you need to have, it depends on your manuscript. So go back to the episode about manuscripts and think about, like, we're going to talk about this in the coming episodes about how to put this in frames. And we talked a little bit about in the last episode when we talked about storyboarding. I talked a little bit about this witch's story, when you saw the one character that was sitting in a bed and then looking at something, and depending on how much I showed, it was the shot, how much I wanted to show depended on what was important, and how much was unimportant I just moved it out of the frame. So for example, if the important thing is that I want to show that the character looks at something, like in this one, the character looks at something, and that's the important thing, and that's why the face is the only important part. Yeah. Want to add something? Do we have some questions, by the way?
We don't have any questions. No questions this time. I think this is all fascinating. This is all the kind of stuff that I don't typically get to delve into. I know it as you're explaining it. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That tracks for all the stuff I've read. But it's very cool to think about all the thought that goes behind laying out these panels and what's so important about it. And like I said, when I read it and it works, I don't notice it, which is kind of a shame in a way, because you put all this work into it only for people to not notice it. But then I guess that means you've done your job right.
Yeah. Okay, so with that being said, we need to talk about some things that I want to, also about dynamic composition. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. When you want to make, for example, an action scene or something more dramatic, having a diagonal horizontal line. So you can see here that things in this frame is laying on a diagonal line. So actually the horizontal line is should be up here, but that's not, like, if I make the horizontal line like this, you see her body is leaning backwards. So that's not really how the horizontal line is. So what I've done is I put the horizontal line diagonally, and that gives the whole frame a little more effect. And the same thing over here. So the diagonal, like the horizontal line is diagonal, and that was like, this is where the ground is. The ground is like this, and that's why this frame gets more action and more of an action feel. So having this skewing things diagonally a little bit gives more power and action. You can put this also in a dramatic scene. It doesn't have to be action. It could be one character telling the other one, I want to break up, but just twisting them a little bit and not putting them straight, but a little bit crooked, you give a lot more effect. And this is used a lot in shoujo manga as well, in dramatic scenes. So you can see the characters are twisted in a diagonal horizontal line. So that's one thing. Also, by using depth in the pictures, you can see this is front and this is the back. So the things over here is smaller. This is back and this is front. So by using depth in a picture, you can also give a lot of effect to the picture. I use the same thing up here. So if we show, for example, this one is in front, this is front, and this is the back. And this way, you also give a depth to the picture. That's also one way to make the composition more, effectful and dynamic. And it's very good for action scenes. So that's one way, and it's a good way to position things and show that things is positioned in a depth. And to make that right, like technically, we're going to talk more about inking and stuff later on in later episodes. But the rule is things in front have thicker lines, things in the back have thinner lines. You use a thinner pencil or nib for things in the back. And also often things in the front you can use, for example, screen tones with bigger dots, like more space between the dots and bigger dots. That way it feels like it's more in the front, while the things in the back should have a more tight screen tone with not so big dots. That's a way to also build depth. I use that a lot in my comics. I think that's a very practical way to And that's the thing that you use in manga, because we use screen tones and half tones in manga. So that's one more thing. Dynamic and depth is also one thing I wanted to talk about. So about depth, we can think about a comic like think about a frame for a comic, almost like this kind of peep show boxes. You know, this kind of, you make a box and you can put things in the depth. Like in the front, you maybe put a character, and then in the back a tree, and then in the very back you put some hills, and then the clouds in the back. And then you look through this box, it looks like there's a depth in the picture. And that's the same thing I want you to think about in this. So if, for example, we have a character here in the front, so this is the front, and maybe even a speech bubble in the front. In the middle line here, this is the middle of the picture. We might have like I said, a tree, for example. Maybe a bench is sitting here in the middle of the picture. And then in the back, so this is the back here, we might have some houses, for example. Like this is housing, so like this. I'm gonna erase it so we see this is just like cutouts. Think of this like cutouts. And the reason why I draw this out is because I want to show you how you can use color for depth as well. We're going to talk more about this later on, but to present this in a good way, think about it as one of these can be black. For example, if you make the background here black, like fully black, like completely black, or if you put a lot of black in it, this way will also give the whole picture a lot of depth, because you show that this is the the background, and maybe even all the way in the back we have some mountains like this. So this is the final background. This is the final backpack. So this way, by making the houses black, we told the reader that this is one of the levels. We could also instead use, for example, black in the front. So if we remove this black and we maybe make the character black, like maybe the character is going towards this and walking into the picture, and maybe like making a shadow on the character would keep more focus on the house and the trees. So this way you can also, like, depending on what is blacked out, you can give more emphasis to what is not blacked out, because things that are light we're going to look at, and things that are blacked out we're not going to look at. And also use screen tones the same way. We're going to talk about screen tones later on. If I, for example, use screen tones on this tree, but I kept the houses very clean and white, I would also give depth, because we would have black, this is gray, and this is white. This way I would get difference in levels. So this is another thing I would like you to remember. Depth is very important. Yeah, so some quick things. Now I give you just quick important things to remember. First of all, the 180 degrees rule. This is important in movie as well. If you have two characters speaking, this is one character that has black hair, and this is one character that has like a short cut like this. These characters are speaking. You see one character to the left and the other one to the right. If you move the camera around, you can move the camera so we see this black character standing in this position, and we see the one character over here in this position. So now we move the camera a bit to this side. So this is from this side, and we can also move the camera towards the other side so we can see the back of this character, and we see the front of the other character. This is all right still, because we're still moving. This is from this side. So we're still moving within the 180 degrees, because think of these as these characters are standing, like this is one character and this is one character. This one is here, this one is here, and the camera is over here. In this shot, the camera have moved over here, you see? And in this shot, it's moved over here. So this is how the camera moves. Let's draw this a little bit better so we can see. So this is how the camera looks like this. It's from the front. This is the one. This is one. And this is number two. Number two is from over here. This is where the camera is. And number three is This one is from over here. It's from behind the white-haired character, like this. Number 3. And the important thing is we're still keeping within 180 degrees. So 180 degrees is this 180 degrees. And we're still keeping within that. But if we move the camera to the other side, like we go from one to the other side, we're going to break that rule. So one thing you cannot do is to, for example, let's move this one a little bit up so you can show. If you, for example, if you would, let's move this up a little bit. If you would make a frame that is from the back of them, so you suddenly have the white-haired character over here, and you would have the black-haired character over here, you see how this frame is actually very confusing, because if you first see this frame, this panel up here, and then you see this panel, suddenly they switch places, and this is very confusing to the reader. So don't do this unless you show how the character moves around in an apartment or in the scenery. If you show them moving around, then make sure you have these kind of panoramic views or top shots from top to above to show how they're moving, but don't switch their places, because that's breaking the 180 degrees rule. And I see this happening so many times in amateur work, and it's confusing the reader. Don't do this. That's one rule. Another thing that is important is to talk about moving with and not against the movement of the page, the reading direction. So we have that, for example, in this one, for example. You can see how in this frame here, we have Amalthea jumping with the reading direction. You see that? We also have it in this frame where they here, for example, let's see. I had one that I wanted to show. This one is one good, for example. So this is where Amalthea is climbing up the hill towards the tower where Ossian is. And what we see here is she's moving with direction. So this is a European or a Western manga. So you're reading this way. That's why she's moving towards with the direction. She's always like moving with the reading direction. And this is also with the reading direction. Here also with the reading direction, she's even looking towards the next page. You really want to turn the page to see what she's looking at. All the time she's moving with the reading direction. If I turned her around, if she, for example, if this frame down here, this one was turned around, for some reason I might have, I don't know, flipped it over, the result would have feel like she's moving like, let's do that. Let's copy and let's flip it over just to show how it will look. One moment. And it would feel like she is, look, it looks like she is going backwards. It feels like she's going somewhere and then she's turning back. And that's not what I want. Like, unless you want to show that the character is confused and doesn't know where she's going, or unless you want to clearly show that she's stopping and turning, don't move, like, don't let the character go towards the reading, like against the reading direction. So use that very thoughtfully and consciously. If the character is going somewhere, let the camera and the reading direction follow that character. And if the character is turning back or turning around or maybe going against someone, then you can go against the reading direction. So you can use that to your advantage and be very conscious about the reading direction, about how the character moves. So that's one more thing. Also, limit what happens in a frame. We had, for example, and this, for example, is one example where what you put in a frame. So in this frame, we have 3 things happening. Someone is speaking, someone is grabbing, and someone is reacting. These 3 things are happening in this frame. I couldn't in this frame also show that he's, like, in the manuscript, you might write, Amalthea says, so move that butt, and then grabs his hand, but he pushes her hand away and says no. And because I said, but he, blah, 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 I made it into one sentence. And then naturally, I would like to put all that in one frame, but you can't. Like, that would be too much information. So when you, like we talked about 2 episodes ago, 2 lessons ago, we talked about how to write manuscripts, how important it is to cut out the sentences into short happenings, like what is happening step by step. So in the next frame here, we have text, someone doing something, reaction, text. That is what is happening. Not too much, not a lot of happenings, especially don't have too many actions in one. You can't show that someone is opening a door, stepping inside, and taking off their hat. You can't show all these things in one frame. Or in one panel. You have to divide it up into 2 or 3 panels. Otherwise, it's going to be very confusing. So remember that you need to know. Yeah.
I was going to say, it also loses the impact. If too much happens in one panel, none of it feels that important. But it's really important here to show that Amalthea grabs Ossian's wrist, and his reaction to that is really important. You don't want that diluted by having it all happen in one frame. You really want that That's a really, really important thing to highlight there.
Yeah, and just like that's a good thing you remember you said that, because if we, for example, if we looked at this first frame, and if I just wanted to show that she grabs his hand, I could just have made a frame with just this and just a speech bubble in here. Like, that could have been enough. But I needed to show his reaction. And also I want to show her reaction, how she's a little bit angry and decided that this have to be done now. So I couldn't cut them out. I had to show the full picture. So that's also one thing you have to remember. How much do you need to show, and what is important to show? Is the reaction important or not? Don't take away reactions, because that is how we readers will feel or have emotions for your comics, is through the reactions of the characters. One more thing, remember to not have too much text. I can't stress this enough. Don't put a whole novel in your frames, in your panels. So if you're making a lot of text in a panel, make it big. So I cut this panel out from the manga. But this is actually, if I would show the whole manga page, this is just one big frame. And in the bottom, there is a small frame, but this is pretty much the full manga page. And that's the reason why I could have so much text in it. I don't know if you have the manga book. Maybe you can show it. It's in the first chapter. It's very early on.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I know where this is.
Yeah, and if I had it in, so you can see it's just the big frame in one full page, and that's the reason why I can have so much text in it. Don't expect this to be every panel, and especially if you're a writer and you're having an artist as your colleague or your companion in this project, do not put too much text in your manuscript, because it's gonna be really hard to make it into a good storyboard and good manga. Not too much text. And also, one tip I would recommend to you is to learn how to speed up or slow down the narration. So if we compare, this is the final thing. If we compare this one, where we have the scene where, or for example, I think this one is better. The scene where Amalthea enters the tower and she steps into the bedroom of Ossian and sees him sleeping. This is not much happening on these 2 pages. It's very slow, because I wanted to slow down so the reader really reads every step and doesn't rush through it. So what we actually see here is she opens up the door, she steps inside, she opens up the curtain and sees him. This is the only things that happens on 2 pages, and that's very slow storytelling. And if we compare that to the action scene, for example, this is the action scene. Now listen to the manuscript here. Amalthea sees her sword, says, "My sword." The dragon is attacking, so Amalthea jumps away, grabs her sword, turns around again, looks at the dragon's throat, and focuses and says, "I have to get up there, I have to get up close." But the dragon sees that. That's a lot of things happening in two pages. And that's because I sped up the storytelling, because it was an action scene. So by do not do the mistake to slow down an action scene just because you think you need to show every movement. That's not going to be beneficial to the action scene. And do not speed up a dramatic scene where you need to show emotions. Do not speed it up. Slow it down. Just slow it down and it's going to be more effective. So learn how to speed up and slow down the narration. That's my tip. Yeah.
That's excellent. That's excellent. I pulled a book off my shelf here that I want to show because I think these are some beautiful panel compositions here. This is from Kamo, Pact with the Spirit World by Banzar. Both very, very, very good. This is one of my favorite spreads.
Oh, yes.
The
double
flow,
spread.
I just want to say, like, the flow of these musical notes, your eyes immediately follow exactly where you want to see. There's very little text. Your eyes are immediately drawn to Crimson. You also see Kamo's reaction here at the side.
Yeah.
It's just a beautifully laid out spread, and there's one right afterwards that I've always loved.
And it's a double spread, and that way they can put in much more information and still keep it slow and not rush it. Yeah.
Exactly. And we have this doctor here who is seeing something truly horrible, this horrible nightmare scene. And then you see his reaction here, and she's got the scream running down the page that really emphasizes it. And you just see these quick shots of other people reacting, and you can feel the energy. Something about how still these panels are and how frenzied Kamo is at the end emphasizes how hard he's running and how quickly he's trying to get away. And it's like reading somebody who knows how to put together panels. You're going to learn so much when you really pay attention to, why does this work? Why does this graphic me?
Yes, and to remember that these kind of effective shots, don't overuse them. Have them very consciously at some spots. Don't do double spreads all the time. Use them like very thoughtfully, and use them with an intent, with a clear intent of effect, to not just like make spreads because the character have a cool pose. Use it to elevate the narration and the story to a very emotional and very effectful scene, for example. So that's so you see, I think
some regular pages here. You don't want to. I want to say that when you're going through a manga, you typically, going through them, when I go through them and I look for spreads, typically you will see about 6 to 8 spreads in a this is, I think, 208 pages. So at about a 200-page book, you're going to see about 6 to 8 spreads. You might have a couple more, you might have less. But that's how rarely you should be using that. It should be a tool that has a lot of impact when it finally happens. There's a final one at the end here that has an incredible effect, specifically because they're not used very often. It has impact. But if every other page is a double page spread, it doesn't have any impact anymore.
And also, I mean, the double spread speed slows down the storytelling, because you have to take in the whole spread, and it also, if you're using it all through your manga all the time, it's gonna become almost like a children's book. It's gonna be very, you can't put a lot of story in it because it's gonna take up too much space with all these double spreads. So that's why use them very thoughtfully and very seldom, because otherwise you can't tell your full story. You're not going to fit everything in there just if you're just going to have double spreads all the time and have like these kind of big pictures everywhere. This is, I think there's a bunch of more tips, but I think with these tips, and if you follow these rules that we put up here, I think your manga is going to be a lot better. And it's just try to start working a lot when and I recommend doing short stories in the beginning. And that's why we have this manga competition, right? We have a small competition.
We do. We have a contest. At the end of this series of classes, it's 13 classes in total. We are going to be running a contest. What we want to see is the manga that you create from these classes, from these lessons. Obviously, a short manga is going to be better. It's going to be easier for you to put together. It's going to be easier for us to really read and really judge thoroughly. To try to aim for a fairly short story. But if you put this all together, we haven't announced specifically the dates yet. We want to give you plenty of time to actually work on it and really put all the lessons to good effect. But at the end, a lucky winner will be chosen, and we'll get to have a one-on-one call with Natalia with a full review of your manga. She's going to give you all of her expertise. She's going to show you things you're doing great. She's going to give you some pointers on how to be even better. And we're also going to pick a few winners who are going to win some Tokyopop manga as well as a prize. So it's definitely worth taking part. And of course, you can also upload your finished comic or your finished manga to Pop Comics, which is Tokyopop's comic app. We have a whole section for indie comic creators. And some of them are fantastic. I've talked about a couple of them on the live stream before. I have my favorites. I have some that I check because I think they're wonderful. I even saw one. There's one called Hell, Nebraska that I love.
Yeah.
I think it's a fantastic, it's a fully contained story. And
wow.
I actually ran into the artist at an artist alley at a convention, and I bought the print copy of his book because I loved it so much, and I got him to sign it for me. So definitely do this. It's a really good way to get feedback from people, to build up a fan base. We have also, in the past, we have taken select titles that we thought were very strong and have worked specifically with the artists on future projects. So definitely give it a try. And I'm going to suggest some homework for people this week. It'll be fun homework. I think you should go away and read your favorite manga, your favorite comic. Read more than one if you can. And this time, pay attention to the panels. I want you to go through and listen to everything Natalia said in this class and really think about what are the effects in this. If you come across a page that really grabs you, sit there and think, why does this grab me? What have they done here? What's the effect it had on me? That kind of thing. And I think you will learn a lot, and you will be able to apply everything that Natalia has very graciously taught us today.
And you will notice how you turn on that analytic eye that I talked about in the beginning, and you can't turn it off. You're going to analyze every page of your manga, and you're going to destroy that enjoyable read. But you will learn how to turn it off. And in the beginning, you need to learn how to turn it on. Just turn on the analytic eye and learn how to analyze and dissect the comics and each part of it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us again, Natalia. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you to everybody watching. We really appreciate you tuning in. As always, if you have any questions or if you have any follow-ups, you can send me an email to kae@tokyopop.com. That's KAE at tokyopop.com. The email address is in the description. You can follow Natalia on her social media. That's also in the video description. Follow us at Tokyopop for our new releases. And we will see you again in 2 weeks' time.
Yay!
Yay! Thanks, everyone.
Yes,
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.